to my dear friend, Dr. John Hamish, Watson.
In general, what we really wanted to try and do this time was run with the relationship between Holmes and Watson, because in the first we had to work quite hard to introduce the characters, to introduce the world, and to give not backstory but give a sense of what to expect from them. And now people know that, we were able to sort of start from the get-go at a faster rate and with more, I wouldn't say eccentricity, but with more breadth. Here it comes. You are so predictable.
Had you and Mary not been so hell-bent on a wedding, we might have easily...
We want to keep coming up with great scenarios where they can be working in harmony with each other and yet bickering at the same time.
Would you have any brown shoelaces? Just to tie together the ensemble.
Hold on. I said I'd lend you a jacket and you're wearing my best suit. Give me my hat back.
Don't you have an extra one?
This is the extra one.
Jude and Robert are good mates. They're both very talented and they enjoy their job. So, you know, it makes my life much easier.
Come on, dude, it's 1989 and we're at a rave up and we all just went out together. How are we doing it? You're there. I'm here.
One of them.
I feel about Jude the way Sherlock feels about John. He's the best partner a guy could ask for.
What is really exciting is when you get to know a character and you really feel comfortable that your interpretation of the character is working, and just trusting that you can trust yourself, trusting your instincts, trusting a sense of clarity as to where and how that person will respond and what they'll say.
Took off like a monkey from a box. I may need one of those later.
And it's your stag night. If you want a monkey in a box or anything of the like, I'll see to it that you get it. Keep these, they're a wedding gift. And I'm not around about tonight.
It was a really rewarding process in the first film. We didn't quite know how it was going to work, but we worked this kind of strange equation out. And to be honest, the one thing I was scared about coming into the second was, would we be able to just pick it up again, or was it something that just happened? And from the get-go, from our rehearsals over at Robert's house prior to filming, we really slipped straight back into it. And if anything, because we didn't have to get to know each other, this one, I hope, has benefited from the fact that we were working that process from before shooting rather than discovering it as we went along.
I'm a bit more dramatic and self-flagellating than some artists, so I'm very passionate, I guess. And I think that was another nice thing with Jude, is that he's very kind of even-keeled about the whole thing, so that no matter how kind of far out I go in trying to do my thing and our thing, he always kind of counterbalanced that nicely.
Would you prefer I joined you in the fashion faux pas of wearing fine military dress with that heinous handmade scarf? Clearly one of your fiancé's early efforts.
Oh, how I've missed you, Holmes.
Have you? Why? I've barely noticed your absence.
To his great surprise, Holmes finds he can't get along without Watson, that he needs his companion, not just because it boosts his ego, because Watson is his biographer after all, his Boswell, as Holmes puts it, but he's there to, in some ways, balance out the things that Holmes doesn't do, can't do. The fair sex is your department, for example, Holmes says to Watson.
Are you happy? What? At this moment, are you as happy as you would be on your honeymoon in Brighton?
I mean, Watson's split down the middle between being sensible and doing what his heart wants him to do.
That's the dilemma Watson faces. He wants the good life with his wife, a safe life, a secure life, and yet there's a little bit of the old soldier in him and the thrill of the chase. You know, he undoubtedly has great times when he's on a case with Holmes.
Thus, our relationship...
Relationship?
Very well, partnership has not yet run its course.
You know, some people have said, oh, he and Holmes are gay, and of course there's some quite funny little, not exactly allusions to that in Guy's films, but it kind of skates on the knowing surface of that quite well, I think.
You finally got me to go to Paris with you.
You and I in Paris together, like a honeymoon without Mary.
We always believe we can do better, and I think the relationship is funnier, more extreme, and more emotional, which is great, which is very satisfying.
aquí tus trailers, visita mi canal.
I am Conor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod. I was born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel. And I am immortal.
My feelings about the film are that I think it's a very popular film and people really like it and people identify with it, and you can never look at a film the same way as the person who was a writer on it or a maker of the film. You know, it is. I've done movies since, you know, and when you look at the movies, you only see the missed opportunities. You don't see, you just see the things that drove you crazy at the time. You don't see the things that work.
The original idea, for which Gregory deserves much praise, is a really interesting idea, particularly for a franchise, because it's the oldest myth in the world, and what Larry Ferguson and I did basically was take that core idea and make a big epic story about it.
The idea for Highlander came from a trip I made to Great Britain when I was about 19 years old. I went to the Tower of London, which has the world's largest collection of armory in the basement. And I was walking through it thinking, well, what if you owned all this? And I thought, well, what if you'd actually worn all this? Because, you know, there's everything there from like medieval Italian to Japanese to whatever. And I thought, well, what if you'd actually worn all this over a long period of time and it never died, and you were actually giving someone a tour of, you know, I wore this then, I wore this then.
What is this, a museum? This stuff must be worth a fortune.
And that's actually seen in the movie, and the movie kind of grew out of that.
I've been alive for 4.5 centuries, and I cannot die.
A film that I loved, which came out about the time that I wrote Highlander, was called The Duelists, Ridley Scott's first film. And there it's this notion of a guy who just won't leave you alone. He just wants to finish this fight, and he won't finish it, you know, and every time you try to finish it, it never resolves. And really you get the feeling the Harvey Keitel character, it's all he's living for. He has really no other point. And what is even the reason for this anymore, no one can remember, but his existence becomes just finishing the fight. And to me that was a very classic dilemma for the main character and how you interact with a person like that. And that, you know, could you be that person in another guise? You know, could honor as easily screw with you? And I felt that that became an idea to drive the plot. And at the soul of it, I thought, the idea of immortality sucks and is a complex gift. I think goes all the way back to Greek mythology.
It very much plugs into what interested George Lucas in Star Wars, which is the hero's journey. It's all it's rooted in very classical mythology.
I was a student in the UCLA film program, and I was in a screenwriting course when I was 20 years old in 1982, and that's where I wrote the script. It was the first script I wrote as part of my coursework. In Richard Walter's class, he's still there. He's the head of the screenwriting program there. He also teaches screenwriting in kind of these seminars around town, and I think maybe even internationally. He has some screenwriting books. He actually talks about the process of selling Highlander in his book, from his perspective of it. And he was very helpful. You know, Highlander's it was kind of a commercial movie, and in the context of an academic setting, and you could easily have been pissed on by an instructor that, for whatever his own frustrations, you know. And I was at an age, first script I ever wrote, and I was insecure enough, I think, not really knowing what was good or bad, that I think that if I'd been less lucky and had an instructor who told me to throw it in the trash can, I might have. Who knows, you know? But Richard Walter I always have to give credit to in the fact that he said, no, this is great. This is, you know, you should do something with this. So I think it was partly that encouragement that helped. I went out and found an agent, and then the agent optioned it to the production company, and they eventually made it a couple of years later. it sounds kind of offhand. Oh, I just wrote a script in college and it got made into a movie. But in fact, it was remarkably common at that moment. There was just a kind of weird moment there where there were a bunch of 20, 21-year-olds running around UCLA who actually had movies getting made. And I don't know if I have an adequate explanation for it. I mean, I think I was lucky.
I always was very much aware of the fact that without Gregory Wyden, you know, this whole thing would not exist.
I was kind of an unusual film school student in that I paid for film school by working as a firefighter at the same time. I had a full-time job as a fireman. And I had joined basically because, I mean, not to make this too complicated, but in Southern California, the fire department and the ambulance corps, the paramedics, are the same thing. The same guys who ride on the fire engine also drive the ambulances. It's the same job. When I was a teenager, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, so I actually went and got a paramedic certificate when I was 17, which is a very weird thing to do for a kid to do at that age. But when I turned 18 and needed a job, I took the firefighter test, and it's a very competitive job here. It's actually a very difficult job to get. But I had the paramedic training, so they kind of went, oh, that's sort of cool. So I was a very unusually young fireman. Most of them were much older than I was. And so it was kind of an odd lifestyle at the time I was writing Highlander, because on the one hand I was going into burning buildings, and then I was, you know, going to class talking about Japanese cinematographers, and it was sort of an odd time in my life. And I don't know what that did or didn't affect in the writing of it, but you know, much of the screenplay when I was writing it was written in fire stations or on the, you know, in between fire calls, and you know, and I guess I was carrying an axe a lot of the time, so maybe that had some influence on it. I don't know. You know, so.
My partner Larry Ferguson and I had done a film for the producers, and they were involved with Gregory Wyden, whose original idea this was. I think it's a brilliant idea to want to make a story about such a person. This guy in a long raincoat with a sword, feeling rather sorry for himself that he had to be immortal. And I think the producers hired Ferguson and I to really create an epic to go with that idea, that there are a group of these immortals who have a particular destiny that they must fulfill. And therefore Connor McLeod becomes a reluctant hero, because he doesn't want to have anything to do with this. And he's been alive for centuries. And way back after the Battle of Kingussie, or whatever it was, here comes Ramirez, Sean Connery, to tell him that he has this extremely powerful destiny, and that if he doesn't fulfill it, the world will come to an end, basically. And the Kurgan will prevail. So that's a classic epic story. It's not the most original story in the world, but it's a tried and true epic structure. And so that's really basically what we brought to it. A lot of other stuff too, a lot of comedy involving the mortal police who are trying to make sense of what's going on and why all these guys are running around New York and doing all this stuff. But at the core, that's really what Larry and I did.
I think in general the script I wrote was probably more serious than the movie. Not that the movie's not serious, but the movie's more farcical in parts and more comic booky in parts. And I think it was a much more intimate, serious film that I wrote. And I think that I was also very obsessed in the screenplay that I wrote about the rules and what I felt these people could do and couldn't do, and what they could experience and not experience. And there were times in the movie where I felt they sometimes did things because they thought it would look good, but didn't really adhere to that aesthetic. I mean, there were some changes. Like I think there's a moment in the movie where Connor McLeod is having a dueling match with another person, and he's laughing. He's drunk, and he keeps being run through, and he's laughing. And I remember thinking, well, I thought the point was that when they get injured, it really hurts. They just don't die. And it was just little things like that. I don't think the average audience member cares, you know. I mean, the essential story that I wrote is there. The essential issues are there. The essential emotions that go through it are there. Some of the characterizations were changed, you know, some of the dialogue and stuff, and some of it leading to kind of perhaps more that lighter thing like that I'm talking about.
Also, let's not forget that the contribution of the director, Russell Mulcahy, was huge. One of the producers called me and said, "We think we have a director. He's an Australian. His name is Russell Mulcahy. And I said, well, who is he? And they told me a little bit about him. And I transferred all that information to Larry Ferguson. I called Larry and I said, well, they think they have a director. He's an Australian. He's done a lot of videos for Duran Duran. And the last film he made was called Razorback. And at the climax of it, the heroine is eaten by a giant warthog. So there's a long pause, and Ferguson says, this may be our guy. So, and as I understand it, that's how Russell got involved. We did have script conferences with Russell, but it wasn't really so much because he needed any further input from us. I think that what turned him on was the stuff that was on the page. And we were there for the shoot, you know, so anytime he wanted to discuss something with us, he did so. He's Australian, of course, and I'm English, and Ferguson is American, but we all got on fine. The initial scene, originally it was a ice hockey game, and the ice hockey sticks being raised in the fight reminded MacLeod of the Battle of Kingussie in the 1540s, and then he becomes aware, because of this sixth sense that he has, that Faisal is in the basement of the Madison Square Garden. So we wanted to shoot a hockey game, and we went to the producers went to the National Hockey League, and they refused to let us do it. I think somebody said, well, hold on a second, the NHL is a fight in which an ice hockey game occasionally breaks out. Why can't we film it? So we had to end up doing it with wrestlers, which of course doesn't make any sense in terms of, you know, MacLeod having the thought, but that's all that Russell had to work with, and he made it work. I think his directing style was very unconventional. I think the continuity girl in England was at her wit's end because she couldn't sort of keep in step with him. But Russell was kind of dreaming up stuff and had thought about the script a great deal and had a remarkable way of, in an extremely sophisticated and elegant way, getting this story down, you know. He got it, you know, and he came up with some highly original ways of presenting this story. He was very complimentary about the script and so on, but he did some very cool stuff. He added to the kind of mysterious quality that Nash had. He's Russell Nash, the Highlander in present day, and you really got this very, very mysterious quality, and Russell was very good at bringing that out. Conor MacLeod is just a simple country boy from Scotland in his clan, but I always liked the initial stages of the story where he is actually run through by the Kurgan. And so right from the get-go, what's good about the piece, I think, is that right from the word go, the Kurgan's saying in effect, you can kill anybody you want, but that guy you leave to me. So that's the first intimation you get that there's some curious connection between these people. And I liked also the fact that the clansmen in those days, in the 1540s, were very spooked by the fact that a young kid who has received a wound that would kill anybody else somehow or other seals up, and there's a very sort of Christ-like kind of quality about that banishment from his village, you know. He's the devil, he's the son of the devil, you know, get him out of here, you know, and he even, I think he's tied to a piece of wood when he's staggering out of the village. And there was a lot of footage that we had there again, I think it got cut down because of time considerations. And I always liked the fact that was underneath it all, you know, that MacLeod is just a guy who wants to live his life and have his wife and have his cattle and his sheep, whatever it is, and live a simple life. And here comes this bizarre character who comes and explains to him that the fate of the world is on his shoulders. He doesn't want to know, you know. And that's terrifically rich raw material to work with.
Now, pendejo, shall we see what sort of swordsman you've become? On guard.
Well, Ramirez understands what's at stake.
Very good.
So it's really the classic case, whether it's in the Karate Kid or any of these movies, there's an old wise person who has all of the information that the audience needs to know.
You must leave her, brother.
And the struggle that Ramirez has with MacLeod to force him to embrace his destiny is really what forms the basis of the relationship in the picture. And so he's come all the way to Scotland to basically say to him, no, you can't marry, you can't marry. And I did this, you know, I went through all of this, it just breaks your heart. MacLeod isn't interested, MacLeod doesn't care. And then, of course, ultimately he realizes, MacLeod does, that everything that Ramirez told him is true. And he steps up and rises to the occasion and fulfills his destiny. We made lots of jokes at the time because, of course, if Connery had been 26 years old, he would have played Connor. Instead, he's playing a Spaniard who had a Japanese wife, and you know, and Connor, the Scotsman, is played by a Frenchman. But the thing about Christophe that I loved was he had a kind of mystique about him. And he looked real good in that gear, you know, when he rides out to battle and all that stuff. I mean, he was just very cool, and the kind of quality that he brought to it, I thought was perfect, because even the slightly French accented voice somehow added to the mystery and the timelessness of his character, that he'd been alive through all these centuries and doing all of these different things, you know. And he was also a very sweet guy. We had a ball working with him. And also, which is my mantra for anything that I write, it's got to be funny. You have to have comedy in it, you know. So, I mean, God knows, there are a million, 2 million scenes that you can write for a guy who never dies, and putting him in situations where everybody expects him to die, you know. So it's just a question of choosing the best ones.
The fascinating thing about watching Highlander as the guy who dreamed it up is it's amazing how many times the movie steps out of itself. You know, particularly some moments with the Kurgan, and Clancy had a real problem with that. He hated what he was being asked to do, and he used to come to me complaining about it, and I didn't know what to tell him because I did think it was a little jokey, you know, and what is essentially a very serious person with a serious issue, it was kind of tarted up a little bit.
Mother's got...
Mom! The Kurgan was probably in many ways the thing that was the most different about my screenplay. He was much more a tortured, it was... The Kurgan in Highlander, as it is pretty much like Freddy. You know, he's just a cackling psychopath. I envision him as a guy who, you know, you lose everything over time, and the only thing that he could hold on to give him a reason to get up in the morning was to finish this thing, and finish it with our guy. And it was really about that more than anything, more than possession of this force, more than, it was just a reason to get up in the morning. Like, what is the point? You know, nothing is permanent, everything is lost. And so that made him a much more serious, almost, in a weird way, sympathetic bad guy. And the Kurgan in the movie is much less that. You know, he's just a guy who screws with people because he enjoys screwing with people. And it's just a different way to do it, you know. But that was probably the biggest difference between the two versions.
There was also a scene involving Napoleon. MacLeod is, at this stage in his life, cleanin, a French window cleaner. And he's cleaning the windows of this mansion that Napoleon has taken over during some battle or other. And Napoleon blasts into the house, knocks the ladder down, and MacLeod falls right on top of him. And Napoleon is under the impression that he's being attacked. And MacLeod explains to him that it was Napoleon's fault. He pushed in and knocked him down. He's not attacking anybody. And Napoleon orders him executed at dawn. And of course he's not. He doesn't die. And Napoleon thinks that people are having him on. But finally he starts looking at MacLeod and eventually links arms with him and walks him away and says, let me get you some breakfast and I'll send you to my tailor. How did you do that? And he makes him a marshal in his army. But I don't know whether that scene survived in any incarnation. No. You see, the fact is that given the fact that you have this character, the sky's the limit. You can have wonderful scenes in any situation, anywhere. I don't know whether subsequent versions of the films had them, but if not, it's a sadly lost opportunity. It astonishes me that people still come galloping up to me and start asking me questions about Highlander. It just tapped into not just that myth of somebody who lives forever, but what that actually means philosophically and emotionally. It's very poignant to me that Connor wanted to marry this girl, Heather, and that her greatest regret is that, you know, she's old and he loves her as much the day she dies as when he first met her. But he still looks 21 years old, 22 years old. So it does have, and I think Gregory's original idea touched on this, that he has many reasons to feel sorry for himself.
I've never really known.
What?
Why you stayed.
Because I love you as much now as the first day we met.
I think the idea is it's almost the classic vampire tale, you know, the woman he loved hundreds of years ago now appears in another guise and seems the reincarnation of the woman he loved, you know. And I think that was sort of the notion of it. I think the idea of, it's kind of a classic story, I think the idea that someone who has not allowed themselves to get close to someone else for centuries and then finds someone that for whatever reason reminds them of that other person and kind of opens themselves up again. You know, it's kind of a classic device, I think. It's also a way to access the sadness of the story too, because for him to be drawn to someone else indicates the loss that happened before. The Highlander itself is on some basic level a tragedy. You know, it's about loss. And I think that's what takes it a couple of notches deeper than guys running around with swords because one wants to rule the world, because there's been a million movies made like that. And I think in the case of Highlander, what makes it different, I think what resonates with people, is there is this sense of loss in it, and tragedy. It is in many ways, amongst being other things, a tragedy. And I don't think any of the other sequels or any of the other interpretations of it have ever captured that essence of it, that Connor McLeod, you know, in his deepest part of his heart, he was just an average guy trying to get through with a really terrible burden, and he chose to process it by becoming isolated. His is a story of isolation.
But the most attractive kind of theme to me for a movie is a hero who, in spite of his own misgivings and in spite of his own anxieties and depression, has to step up and get it done. There's a lovely vibe about the whole piece. It works, you know, and it works at different levels. You take any 8-year-old who watches it, and it's just so cool that they take people's heads off and the power transfers from one person to another. But at a deeper level, something is going on which that child might not completely grasp at the time. But the reason why, the idea of seeing the movie again when he's 10 years older or 15 years older, I think that's one of the reasons.
I mean, I think it's a compliment to Russell that, you know, there are a lot of guys that came into features from directing videos. It's, you know, always been a fad in Hollywood to, you know, Jerry Bruckheimer pretty much exclusively employs them. But you look at a lot of the films that they made in the 1980s, and a lot of them seem very dated, their techniques. And the reality is there's something else obviously going on in Highlander than flashy shots, because people who are very young still discover the movie and still become very, you know, upset. I constantly meet people, for some reason a lot of them are in the military, that it's an incredibly popular film with them, and these are 20-year-old people that were, you know, barely born when it was made. And so clearly they're not sensing a datedness in the way it was shot, and that's probably a compliment to both, you know, the cinematographer and the director, that it doesn't disturbingly feel like a mid-80s movie.
It didn't sort of go through the roof when it was in its initial theatrical release, and I don't think it got particularly good reviews. But I think I got over the depression within 3 or 4 years. I think it took me to get over it. No, I mean, it would have been nicer to have had a more positive critical response. But I think what happened, and of course this is the early days of VHS, I think that, you know, when you hear talk of, oh, well, it didn't do very well in theaters, but it had a long afterlife on video, I think that was one of the classic, Highlander was one of the classic examples. It just built and built and built and built. So it was very attractive to us, even then, as a potential franchise, as I'm sure it was to the producers.
There was a period of time when Highlander 2 came out that my name wasn't Gregory Wyden, it was Gregory Wyden, I didn't write Highlander 2. You know? Because people were so angry at that movie, and I remember I had to just constantly say, no, I'm the one guy that didn't have anything to do with it. You know, I was off. I didn't do that one.
I have sole credit on Highlander 2, and Highlander 2, which was of course the one following the one that did so well. It was a pivotal movie and very important to try to get the franchise moving in the right direction. It ended up being something a little bit different from what certainly I had in mind, but the producers, I think, were very much in charge of this new direction, which I think involved other planets and all that kind of thing. I mean, you can try, you know, given a set of circumstances, there's always an opportunity to turn it into something that works. But I think it was a little bit betwixt and between. You weren't quite sure quite what was going on, because it wasn't quite as grounded in any kind of graspable myth as the first movie was, which really was laying the foundation for a franchise which, in my opinion, should have ramped off that first film to a far greater extent. I think it would have done better. I think what tended to happen in the subsequent sequels is that each film became just sui generis. It just became a film unto itself, rather than, you know where you are, you know who your people are, here's a new adventure involving them. So there is a unity of all that Aristotle stuff about unity of time, place and action. You know where you are, and therefore you're free to enjoy it all again. With the sequels to Highlander, I think that was not quite so much the case.
Well, the firefighting job only really lasted through film school. After Highlander, I pretty much didn't need the money. And also, you know, that's a job you either do or you don't do, and I was running away to be on film sets, and, you know, it's not fair to the people you work with who depend on you for their life, that, you know, that you got to stay toned, you got to be there, and so I left, and then young, just out of college, I left. I only did it 3 years, and then I just went on and I did a lot of television. I did the film Backdraft with Kurt Russell and Robert De Niro. I wrote, directed The Prophecy. There's been 4 sequels to that, and I'm doing a pilot now for Fox, and did some other stuff and TV movies, and, you know, I had a television series on with Spelling and just stuff like that. So
I have one line for all German fans of this picture: Es kann nur einen geben.
Guy invented Holmes' vision for the last film, and I think it worked out extremely well.
Clip wings. Now, blunt his beak.
He pictures how the fight will go in his head, and we watch that, and then we see it done in real time.
We've tried to improve upon it. We've tried to sort of evolve it in this next iteration.
Well, do you want to track out of the previs as well as tracking into it? You track in, previs.
Then track out and go straight to action.
And then track out to action.
It'd be nice if it's basically the same shot. It's the in,
well, let's
the out. Well, I didn't want to repeat the same Holmes division. Half speed, 3, 2, 1, action!
Guy made it very clear from the get-go what he wanted to create, and he was true to his word.
And I can tell that he's really, really giddy and happy about some of the tech stuff he was able to do, and to keep infusing this film with that kind of Guy Ritchie style.
The speed of the Phantom camera allowed us to sort of, I hope, do something original. I'll go back that way, and then I want to bring you back.
He knows what he wants, and he knows how to shoot it. Has a great way to move that camera. He knows how to make it look. He has a great sense of the pace. He has a great sense of the characters.
Guy did incredible work on the first movie. It was just the perfect marriage of seeing how a character works in an action scene and then the physicality works, and it married the two. It was cool visuals married with, wow, this is what our character is thinking. And that was really unique.
I do quite like action sequences, but I'm only interested in action sequences if I can somehow add something new to it.
And action.
We said, okay, for him to just think it and enact it, we saw that. We saw that perfectly in the first film. So how can we, if we're ever going to use it again in this movie, what can we do that changes that up?
What we've done is we've introduced moments where it doesn't work quite as well as expected.
There's different endings.
You see some of Holmes's limitations in the first time if he's not going to imagine someone else might interfere with what he plans to do. And then you see his actual strengths the second time, because if he knows someone is interfering with what he's planning, he's figured out how to deal with that.
Come now. You really think you're the only one who can play this game?
Moriarty's very much, both in the books and in our films, sort of Holmes's dark twin. He is very much a match for Holmes because he is equally intelligent.
Looking back at Doyle's stories, and particularly his literary sentiments regarding kind of the Holmes versus Moriarty of it all, it just seemed like it had to have a bit more gravitas and be a bit more exciting and challenging and all that stuff.
Action.
And we get a sense in the great game that they're playing is that they can match each other move for move. And so we've applied that to Holmes' vision as well. And so Moriarty has his Moriarty vision, which matches Holmes's vision.
Trap arm, target, weakness.
Which leads to an interesting complication, which is, where does that go? If they continually know exactly what the other person's going to do, well, how do you end the fight?
It seemed like a perfect opportunity to have simultaneous vision that would allow you to understand that both Moriarty and Holmes were working on the same intellectual plane.
And it really looks incredible because you have these two actors, no stunt guys, physically doing all these actions, and they're really making contact with each other, which is incredible.
And again, it stopped us from repeating ourselves in the first one.